This ClickView enablement module will provide you with that next level of troubleshooting when it comes to database connector issues. A great way to troubleshoot these issues are to become familiar with the data source name and which type of connector is needed to be able to interact with the data source and retrieve data. Now, some of the most common issues we have seen are related to either receiving a QVW file from someone else, or the QVW file location was changed, or moving the QVW file to a different physical machine. So understanding how connection paths work and then confirming they are current and accurate will help minimize reload issues. Let's begin with the first example where the reload fails, saying data source name not found. What are some of the things to think about before troubleshooting? Be aware of your settings when loading data from data sources. It requires a connector on the ClickView machine to be able to interact with the data source and retrieve data. A few choices can be ClickView Customer Connector, ClickView Salesforce Connector, ClickView Connector for use with SAP NetWeaver, ODBC Connector, OLEDB Connector. Using any of the different connectors require that the local setting and installation of the ClickView machine are accurate. For example, this sample file uses the ODBC connector to access a Microsoft Access database file, and then reloads some data from the database. By loading this script, an error message stated that data source name not found and no default driver specified is displayed, and the reload fails. This means that there is a mismatch in the specified ODBC data source name specified in the connection string and the ones available on the local machine for the user executing the script reload. The data source name, also called DSN, is specified as Microsoft Access Database in the connection string. How would you go about troubleshooting this? Well, the ODBC data source DSNs are maintained in the Windows ODBC Data Source Administrator. So the first thing to notice here is that there are system and user DSNs. DSNs in the System DNS tab will be available to use for all users on the machine, while the user DSN will only be available for current logged in users. For example, if a user DSN is added during development and the script is later reloaded by a ClickView publisher, it will not work unless the same DSN is added for the ClickView publisher service user or as a system DSN on the machine. The DSN is called by its name, so it is also important that you spell it exactly the same way in the settings as it is in the connector string. The DSN, Microsoft Access Database, referred in the ClickView connection string does not appear to be available in the user or system DSN list. The option to solve this issue is now to either add the DSN to match the name used in the connection string or to redirect the connection string to another DSN that uses the required ODBC connection. So, in conclusion, for this case, it is obvious that the DSN to use should be MS Access Database. So the solution is to rename the DSN part in the connection string. This type of issue can occur when receiving a ClickView application from another developer or if there is a Surface account running the reload. Remember to save and reload so you don't lose your new connection string. As we look at the next example, it contains a database connection and a load statement that loads data and aggregates data on the database side. What are some of the things to think about before troubleshooting? Well, notice that the SQL part of the load statement is sent to the database over the connection for interpretation. This means that the SQL statement is not interpreted or evaluated by ClickView, but only by the receiving data source. Reloading the application leads to an error message being received both in the GUI and in the script log. Error message QVX unexpected end of date SQL error message with an error code. The error code indicates an error on the database side and mentions the data type mismatch. This should be checked on your database side before continuing on the ClickView side. So how would you go about troubleshooting this issue? Well, this type of error message often gives error codes or messages that could be possible to look up on the internet for further troubleshooting based on the code numbers. In this case, the issue is related to the configuration on the database side, as one of the fields is numeric and the other is textual, and therefore the aggregation will not be possible to execute on the data source side. So in conclusion, there could be a couple of different approaches to troubleshoot and solve this issue. One option is to alter the data types on the data source to enable the functions required in the SQL statement. Or another option is to load the data without the aggregation to QlikView and perform data manipulation in the load statement instead. Or another option, if the data related to the issue is not accurate, the issue could be resolved by updating the actual data on the data source side. Now this brings us to the last example. When data is loaded from the data source to QlikView, it could sometimes appear to be incorrect. For example, the values of the amount of data is not as expected. So how would you go about troubleshooting this? Maybe validating the data source. So a quick way to validate if the results loaded to QlikView are the same as the ones sent from the data source is to load the same SQL statement to another application. For example, Excel, Microsoft Query, or a database server native client. This example uses an SQL query with a where clause and returns 3 rows of data as seen in the table box. Copy the SQL statement to enable running exactly the same statement from another application. Remember not to include the word SQL and not to include the semicolon at the end. Any application that can fetch data over the same connection as used through QlikView can be used as reference to validate if the data received in QlikView is the same as the data transmitted over the connection. In this example, we will use Microsoft Query. Here are the instructions. Go to File and New. Select the same ODBC connector as you used in the QlikView called MS Access Database. Browse to the location of database11.accdb. Highlight T1 and click the right arrow button in the dialog box. Click Next, Next, and then Finish. Click the SQL button. Delete the SQL statement and paste the one previously copied. Press OK. The result should now match the one received in QlikView. So in conclusion, if the result is the same in QlikView as in other tools, then further investigation should be made on the database side too, if the data is inconsistent or if there is some other reason why the expected data is not sent to a requesting client. As a reminder, when you run into database connector issues, or you're suspecting a database issue, a great way to troubleshoot these issues is to become familiar with the data source names and which type of connector is needed to be able to interact with the data source and retrieve data. Also, identify the SQL error codes so you can ask your database administrator to help investigate the issue at the database side. A few tools and resources you can use is the QlikView Help menu. Also, you can view the release notes, reference manuals, article knowledge base, and Qlik Community. As a reminder, when you run into database connector issues, or you're suspecting a database issue, a great way to troubleshoot these issues is to become familiar with the data source names and which type of connector is needed to be able to interact with the data source and retrieve data. Also, identify the SQL error codes so you can ask your database administrator to help investigate the issue at the database side. A few tools and resources you can use is the QlikView Help menu. Also, you can view the release notes, reference manuals, article knowledge base, and Qlik Community.